Welcome to the StoryADay Podcast. This is Julie Duffy from StoryADay.org, encouraging you to be a writer every day, not someday. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Julie from StoryADay here. And as promised last time, I'm going to be talking to you today about more engagement with your writing, the writing world, and so forth. In the past couple of episodes, I've talked about really getting engaged with your writing. In other words, making sure you're doing some, making sure it's the right kind of writing for you. And then I talked about engaging readers, so making your stories engaging to readers, but also about the possibility of engaging with readers, whether it's through conversations, through reading their reviews of other people's work that's like yours, whether it's building an email list so that you can keep in touch with them as you have more products to offer, and whether it's not worrying about that too much yet because you're not at the stage where you're releasing work. I talk to people all the time who worry about their author platform, and author platform can be important, especially for nonfiction. But if you spend all your time trying to build an author platform, guess what you're not doing? Writing stuff that you can then release to that author platform. So don't allow worries about future marketing to stop you from creating something awesome. That was sort of the gist of the previous episode of the podcast, which you can find if you have subscribed, which of course I'm sure you have. Go into your podcast app, find the feed for Story a Day, scroll back up and look at those two episodes. If you haven't listened to them, give them a listen. I try and keep them to 15 to 20 minutes so that I am not taking up too much of your writing time, and today will be no different. Today, I'm talking about the scary subject of engaging with the publishing world. Now, that is everything from other writers to publishers and beyond, the interviewers that you might have to talk to, things like that. First of all, do you need to worry about this? If you are not writing anything at all, then no. You may want to keep abreast of what's going on in the publishing world so that as you write, you can adjust your definition of success. Because if you follow a lot of writers in their casual social media forums where they're talking about the realities of the lifestyle of being a working writer, and you listen to them talking and you think, wow, that doesn't sound like the kind of life I want. I don't want to turn my writing into a job. That's really useful information to know. It doesn't mean you should stop writing at all, but it should mean that you are prepared not to expect to turn your writing into a job. And if you do think, oh, yeah, I could do that. Look at that writer. He's churning out a bunch of books. He's writing in all these couple of different genres. He's writing nonfiction as well as fiction. I could do that. And I would really be happy sitting in my house writing constantly and meeting deadlines and signing contracts. And that motivates you, then that's great. So if you're still at the beginning of your journey as a writer and you don't really know what your definition of success looks like, then yeah, engaging with the publishing world in some way, whether it is following authors on social media or reading Publishers Weekly or subscribing to Publishers Marketplace, which is a website magazine that has been around for, I don't know, over 20 years at least, and talks about deals, and it's a database for where people are. Maybe you want to read Kirkus Reviews, which talks about books that are coming up, or subscribe to Edelweiss, or what's the other platform where people share galleys before advanced review copies before their books come out? NetGalley, that's the one. So there's lots of ways that you can inform yourself about the publishing world, but if you're not writing a lot and you're not too worried about it, don't worry about it. You don't need to do all the things all at once. I listened to a really good interview this week with an author, science fiction fantasy author called Cameron Hurley, Cameron with a K. And I'll link to that in the show notes. But I thought it was really good because she had lots of great advice and lots of great sort of information from the trenches about what it's like to be a working writer. And I recommend listening to that one and then maybe a couple of other things. And then not spending too much time worrying about publishing if you're not near that point yet. Cameron Hurley talked about how she keeps a day job because it allows her to do the kind of writing that she loves, and because royalties can be, at the very least, unpredictable, and at the most, not necessarily enough to live on, even though you have fans and 12 books in the world. That's not true for all writers, but it is true for a lot of writers. So again, engaging with the publishing industry and finding out what it's really like to live life as a writer can be really helpful in setting your expectations, not even expectations, but your own definition of success. Because you can shoot for, I want to be one of those super successful, high figure advance authors, and you can work towards that, and you can do everything you can to maximize your chances and to make sure that you are making yourself as lucky as possible. But you need to know that is what it takes. Alternately, you can look at that and go, you know what, I am just going to write and see what happens. And I'm not going to expect to make my living off this anytime soon. Or if I do, I'm going to go out and buy a copy of Jane Friedman's book, The Business of Being a Writer, and study that and figure out the multiple income streams I might need to support myself as a writer. It's probably not all going to come from my novels. Cool, I know that. So let me go figure out another path. So that's if you are near the beginning of your journey, not quite sure how to engage with the publishing world, avoiding it because you don't want anything to do with it, with the business side of it, which can be fine because it can stop you from getting blocked. But then you have to have other avenues of success in your head that you are really committed to. Because the world around us will ask you stupid questions like, when's your bestseller coming? When are you going to do a publishing deal? When's the movie coming out? Because that's how people see books. They don't know what goes on under the hood. It's not their fault. But they're going to ask you questions that define success in a way that is very narrow, very unusual, not the only way to be successful as a writer at all. I am always talking here about how much writing is a part of us. We are fulfilled by our writing. And when it is reduced to a business transaction, A, you can't get to the part where you can have a business transaction unless you're practicing writing a lot. And B, the business transaction is not the most rewarding part about writing. I know that. The rewarding part is when you finish that tricky chapter, when you end that story, when you write a paragraph that you didn't think you were going to be able to write, when you've spent half an hour in the flow and feeling just completely yourself. You feel like you're living life the way you're supposed to be living it, even if you can only do it for half an hour every couple of days. Just feeding that part of your soul brings you back to life. And I think that is the most valuable definition of success and purpose for writing. And if everybody who ever listened to my podcast or took part in a challenge or took a course from me or read anything that I ever wrote, if all they got from it was that they gave themselves permission to be a writer, however that looks today, then I would be satisfied. Now, as it turns out, people who are in my world and who take that message on and who start writing more and who focus on making themselves feel great about their writing tend to then get a little itchy for the next stage, and they tend to start submitting things and they tend to start getting acceptances. But the love of writing comes first, and the willingness to do the writing regardless of external validation. is what comes first. And you have to have a firm belief that you have a right to. You have to have a firm belief of what success looks like for you today, because other voices from around us will try to sway you, not on purpose, but they will come in and start to weasel into your brain. And you have to be able to say, basically, your expletive of choice and I'm going to write anyway. All of that is my preface to now talking about if you are one of those people who is ready to engage with the publishing industry, you've been working on your manuscripts, you really feel like they're ready for readership, what do you do? It depends, as is always my answer. It depends on what you want to publish, how you want to publish it, things like that. But the first thing that I tend to do is lurk. I tend to lurk around social media places where authors are hanging out, where editors are hanging out. I tend to go to conferences if I can and listen to panels. A lot of those are online now, and a lot of them have archives that you can listen to from years later. There are podcasts that do panels with authors and agents. There are podcasts that are agents talking about queries. First of all, what's a query? I've got a series here on YouTube which you should go and look at. If you ever don't know what I'm talking about, there's a series I did on my YouTube channel, the StoryADay YouTube channel, where I do short videos called Julie Explains Things Simply. There's a whole playlist there. So if you hear me using a word like manuscript or query and you don't know what it is, go and check out that series where I do these short definitions for you. So anyway, a query is what you will need to send to a publisher before you get a publishing deal. But even before that, you mostly have to send a query to an agent to get an agent to represent you. And a literary agent works for you. They get paid when you get paid. They get a percentage of whatever deal they negotiate with the publishers for you. Publishers in general don't want to work directly with authors before they've signed a deal because that would take up their whole life. They would never get anything done. So the system has evolved to a point where authors have representatives and representatives go to the publishers and they all kind of know each other on a business level and they talk on that level. And then the agent communicates with you and lets you if they've managed to get you a deal or not. But before all that happens, you have to write a query letter. And there's different types of query letters depending on whether you're writing nonfiction or fiction. Nonfiction one's really called a book proposal. And you tend to write that before you've even written the book. The fiction version and the memoir version is called a query, and you write that usually after you've finished the book and when it's pretty much ready to go. And these things summarize the thrust of the book. They talk about who the audience for the book is. They will talk about some similar books, and you put this document together before you approach an agent. So first of all, you're going to probably, if you're getting ready to release a book-length work, you're going to research some agents who represent books like that. And you're probably going to do that by buying a month's subscription to Publishers Marketplace and looking at who's doing deals for what types of books. And then you'll look up the agent and you'll see if they are open to submissions, meaning that they are looking for new clients or not. Some of them don't very often. You can also then look at other agents in the same agency and see if they're looking for new clients. At that point, you will go and you will read what they are looking for in there. They're very specific. They'll tell you exactly what they're looking for. They'll tell you how they want the query to be sent. Almost nobody wants it by email. They're mostly using submission trackers or portals these days. But you really have to look very carefully, and it's a lot of work because every agent has their own specific way they like to receive things. So it's a really good idea to do some research there first. And then once you've got an idea of who's looking for clients and what specifically they want to hear from you, then you can go and start building your query, which will include things like, they will all have different, although the agents all have different preferences, your query letter for a novel or a memoir will generally include a sort of one-page summary, executive summary kind of bit, saying who you are, what the book is generally about, how long it is, what genre it's in, that kind of thing. Then it will also include a summary, which includes sort of the first act of the story. And I know that's different for different books, and memoir will be different. And then it will include a section on how you think it should be marketed, and it will include a section on similar books that have been published recently, and why you think that your book is like them. And there's a whole bunch of other things that you might include in queries. But after you've read a few agents' websites and their wish lists, you'll get a sense for which of those pieces you need to do. And there are a ton of books and websites out there that will help you actually get the query letter done. While you're doing all that, I'm going to recommend that you, I was going to say lurk around. Lots of agents have podcasts now. I'll link to some in the notes. Lots of agents and editors from book publishers have podcasts where they talk openly about what they're looking for, because it is in their interests. We have this sense as writers on the other side of the fence when they're saying no to us, and we're sending our queries and manuscripts off into this black box of the publishing world. And all we get back is a very terse yes or no, and occasionally a personalized comment. The sense is that there's this world out there where it's very adversarial, it's them and us. But the reality is everybody in the publishing industry is in it because they love to read, and they really want to get really good proposals and manuscripts and queries. They're picky about it because it's their job. And they are looking at such a high volume of content coming in that it makes their job harder if what you submit to them doesn't include all the things they're looking for. To do something at high volume, it's easier if the process is the same every time. So if I tell you to submit short stories to me because I'm going to be putting together an anthology, and I ask you to submit them through a particular portal, and I ask you to submit them double-spaced in 12-point Times New Roman, it's not because I'm being a jerk. It's because when I open up file after file and I'm making notes on them, I have my own system of working. And when I open up a file that's single-spaced and courier and in red ink, it just slows me down for a couple of minutes. And I have to then get it into the format where my brain is used to looking at, so I can compare everything on a level playing field. So I have to select all, I have to change the font, I have to change the spacing. When somebody is doing that kind of thing day in and day out, if you don't follow the submission guidelines, you make it harder for them, and you do not endear yourself to them. It's just human nature. So they're not being picky on purpose. They're being picky because this is their job. It's a high volume, high stress job. They want to find great work. So make it easy for them. It's a lot of work for you up front, but think about how much work it is for them. They're reading hundreds of queries all the time, looking for something great and trying not to miss something great. So a little compassion for the agents and editors, I think. But yeah, I'll provide a list of some of the podcasts that I like and some of the Substack newsletters that I like. There's a very good one by an agent called Kate McKean called Agents and Books, where she talks about what it's like to be an agent, and it's very practical and helpful. There's a podcast where a couple of agents read a query every month, and they all go to town on it and say what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it. And because there's more than one of them, it's interesting because some of them, it's like with a query group, when some people like it and some people don't like it, and they all have different things to say about the same query. So it's really great to gather that information so that you understand that it's not all or nothing. You're not going to get rejected solely because you make one single mistake on a query letter. And one person may like the way that you've talked about the book. One person may think it's not great, even though it's exactly the kind of book they represent, but they don't like the way you talk about it. And it's not all or nothing. It's a numbers game. All right, so that's for people with book length things. What about people who are submitting short stories, essays, things like that? You've heard this advice before, but it really holds up. You've got to look at the publications that are out there and whether your piece is going to fit. And I say you've got to, you don't have to. If you're willing to send out 25 pieces at once to multiple markets, and every time one comes in, you just send it out again, and some of them stick, that's fine. If you've got the discipline to do that, if you've got the fortitude to take all those rejections, if you're willing to think that there's editors sitting at their computers somewhere going, why the heck did this person send this to me? If you're okay with that, then good for you. Just make sure you're sending out tons and tons of stuff all the time. Ideally, of course, if I was publishing a journal, I would want everyone to know exactly what I was looking for, because they've read the journal and they've read the kinds of stories that I want, that I like. But then if I put my journal behind a paywall, I can't really expect everyone to have read 3 or 4 issues of it and know it. What do? I think you read the ones you can. You read whatever free content is on the website of the journal. You understand that if they're putting it behind a paywall, it's because they're trying to make some money off this, and they're probably trying to pay their authors, which is good. And you just do the best you can to find out what the tone of the journal is and how it suits you. And then, once again, you've got to pay attention to the submission guidelines, because for the same reasons, if somebody's reading hundreds and hundreds of things and you haven't followed their submission guidelines, it's sort of like refusing to shake hands when you meet someone. If you hold out your hand to shake hands with someone and they refuse, that's not a great start to the interaction. They might have legitimate reasons to refuse, but unless you can see a cast on their arm, you're going to be a little less inclined to be disposed towards them. So following the guidelines is the handshake. You might not like handshakes, but you can grit your teeth and do it. So there's so much more information available about these things now than when I started out. When I started out, you pretty much had to buy Poets and Writers or read it at the library. You had to get a copy of Writer's Digest's Big Book of Markets, whatever that used to be called, and you had to leaf through it, and you had to print things out and send them off with a little return postcard or a return envelope. And you waited months, and eventually you might get a little postcard rejecting you in the mail, or you might get your manuscript back in no fit condition to be sent out again. And it was all very slow and difficult. Now there's lots and lots of markets, and not all of them are necessarily worth submitting to. A lot of them fold quickly because they are founded by enthusiasts rather than people with any business plan. I do recommend that anytime you get published, take screenshots, because if it's an online market, it seems like it should be there forever, but you go back in 10 years' time and chances are they no longer are paying for that domain to be hosted anywhere, and your story, evidence of your publication, has disappeared. So take screenshots when you get published. That's the sort of the equivalent of getting author copies. It's better because it's harder to lose a screenshot than it is to lose a physical copy, in my experience, although I'm pretty good at losing things, so I may eat those words. But there's another thing to notice about engaging with the publishing industry, and that's that it doesn't all have to be on a business level. Humans are human, and we like working with people we like. You will see this if you pay attention to authors and agents and editors online. They promote work by their friends. Friends got a book coming out, you post about it. Your buddy who runs a magazine has a call for submissions, you share it. This is how humans work. It's not corrupt. It's just how humans work. And I always like to understand a little more about human psychology because A, I think it makes my writing better, and B, it makes it easier to be in the world if you understand how humans work and just go with it. So people like to support people they like and people they know. So you don't have to be on a formal business footing with people all the time. You can jump into a thread where they're chatting and share a line, a joke, or compliment them on a story that you just read, or whatever feels natural and human. And it's a slow game getting known that way, but it also reminds you that the people who are in the inner circle are just human, and it also makes you familiar to them. I can't count the number of times had this happen or watched it happen to other people, where people that you only know from social media, you only know from your blog comments, you only know from your Substack comments, bump into each other in the real world, and it's, oh, hey, I know you. And you know them from the writing that they have shared with you, either in comments or in support of your work. And people are generally pretty pleased to see the folks that they've met online. It's just how humans work. Places that I used to follow a lot of writers on Twitter because that was where they were hanging out. And when that all imploded, it was hard for a while to find, everyone was trying to find the next place where they could find each other. And Post came along and Mastodon and Threads, and none of those seem to stick for the writers that I follow. They may be where the writers who are writing in your genre are. If you're in sort of the fantasy and sci-fi world, they seem to be currently conglomerating on Blue Sky, which is very Twitter-like. You still need an invite to get onto it, but there's a lot of the old author camaraderie and sort of just back and forth and chit-chat on Blue Sky. So that's where I'm spending my social media time at the moment. You may find them on Instagram, or you may find people on TikTok, or you may find people on Threads, or you may still be able to stomach Twitter or X or whatever it's calling itself until its inevitable downfall. So, or you may find people in Facebook groups. So wherever you find your authors, hang around, be nice, be friendly, compliment them, share resources, share jokes, just the way you would with any normal human. There's also a lot of writers and agents and editors who are starting or have been running Substack newsletters. Those are a little more broadcasty. They're more them broadcasting to you, but often they'll open up the comments and they'll ask a question, get a discussion going. What did you think of this? What are your thoughts? What resources would you like to share? Also, a lot of authors have Patreon campaigns where you can support them. And increasingly, I'm seeing that groups and authors will have something as a Patreon reward where you can join them on a Discord server, and they've got a little private community going there. And that's great. You can interact that way. Again, it's very much like Substack comments and blog comments back in the day. And I think Discord, you're playing in somebody else's house, and it tends, you have one host. And so it's less free-flowing than something like Twitter or Blue Sky, but it's also, because you're in somebody else's living room, people tend to behave a little better. So there's that too. So you can interact with people in the publishing world in many ways. And sometimes it's fun. Don't think of it as a chore. If it's a chore, don't do it. You don't have to. None of this stuff has to get done. But if you like listening in on the conversation, find out, experiment a little bit with all these different platforms and follow people who you admire, and then look at who they follow and look at who's following them and maybe follow some of them. It's just getting involved in the conversation. And the only reason to do this is to prepare yourself for the day when you are one of them, when you are in there, when the people who are slightly ahead of you on this journey are sharing their experiences, you maybe want to listen. So I've talked a lot today about how to engage with the publishing industry, why you should or why you shouldn't, where you might find some of those folks, what you should be thinking about at different stages of your journey. I hope some of it's been helpful. I think I'm going to be working on a query soon to get a non-fiction book published I'm hoping to query a book with traditional publishers because I think that's the right avenue for it. I think that's the right forum for it. It's the right way to present it to the world. But I've also got some novels that I want to get out that I might be releasing myself through self-publishing and seeing how my marketing chops are there. So there's lots of ways to be involved with and to be engaged with the world of publishing so that ultimately you can be engaged with readers and you can keep your enthusiasm going for being engaged with your writing if that's something that stokes your enthusiasm. If you're able to write just for your own pleasure, then fabulous. There's nothing wrong with you. Don't worry about that. Just keep writing because it is the thing that gives us pleasure. It's the thing that makes us ourselves, and we should all be writing. We deserve it. It makes us better, makes the world a better place. And I will be back soon with more thoughts on why you should be a writer today, not someday. Thanks for listening. Why not come over to the blog at StoryADay.org and check out this week's writing prompts and articles. Don't read another book in the meantime, or article. Have a great creative week. And of course, I'm here to invite you to consider